What's the most absurd fact that sounds fake but is actually true? Out of all the animals in the world, the most successful hunter by far, with a stunning success rate of 95%, is the dragonfly. There's a species of jellyfish called Teratopsis downii, also known as the immortal jellyfish. I had to Google the name lol, that can literally reverse its aging process. When it's injured, sick, or even just stressed, it reverts its cells back to their earliest form, essentially starting its life over again. It's like the creature figured out how to cheat death, hitting the reset button on its existence. Crazy emo. Mazda has had the two most oddly specific product recalls in automotive history. They had to recall a bunch of Mazda 6s because spiders kept infesting the fuel lines. For whatever reason, this problem was limited to one model, and only one generation of that model. Spiders didn't duck with any of their other cars. They had to recall a bunch of other cars because the infotainment system would break whenever users tried to listen to 94.9 QA radio in Seattle. It wasn't the wavelength stations on 94.9 in other cities were totally fine. This problem was specific to Kual. At one point, in Hawaii, you were more likely to get attacked by a Miller than a shark. About 2/3 of your human ancestors are female. It's because of pedigree collapse, where you should have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 GT grandparents etc. So, going back about 30 generations, that is, the Middle Ages, you should have a billion ancestors, which is more people than even existed. In reality, as you go back in your family tree, the same people start to appear multiple times. For example, anyone with any English blood will have King Edward I as an ancestor on dozens of separate lines because of his many children, including bastards. The flip side of this is that many more males than females leave no descendants at all. Egypt is older than a lot of people realize. There were archaeologists in ancient Egypt. I think the fact was that Egypt has been around so long that they had archaeologists whose speciality was ancient Egyptian history. Sharks have been on the planet longer than trees. Yeah, sharks have been around for over 400 million years while trees only showed up about 350 million years ago. Guess they really perfected the survival of the fittest thing. There was a shipwreck in 1664, a shipwreck in 1785, and a shipwreck in 1820. Each had one survivor. Each survivor was named Hugh Williams. I see a lot of octopus facts, but what I find most interesting besides their intelligence and hearts is that they only live about 3 years. They mate once and die. It's theorized that that's the reason they're just animals. If they had longer lives, it isn't unlikely that they would have evolved further and possibly became a sapient species. That cigarette lighters were invented before matches. In a related fact, it took around 50 years after the can was invented to invent the can opener. In the meantime, a hammer and chisel were used. The company that makes Lamborghini started as a tractor company and only began making them out of spite against Ferrari. Ferruccio Lamborghini owned a Ferrari and thought the clutch was awful. He was constantly having to have it rebuilt and was sick of it. He went to Enzo Ferrari about it, who basically told Lamborghini to duck off. After that, Lamborghini modified his Ferrari's clutch to be more reliable than stock and decided to start making cars. He was also not a fan of the way he took his Ferrari in for a service and had to wait around outside in the heat while the car was whisked away behind closed doors. He had a laundry list of complaints he wanted to bring to Enzo, but he was having none of it. So Ferruccio started to modify Ferraris, which Enzo also didn't like. Then started building his own cars, which Enzo especially didn't like. Honestly, it sounds like Ferrari had some lousy customer service and all Lamborghini wanted to do was show him how to be a bit nicer to the customers. On the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the Louisiana Purchase, the group happened to encounter Sacagawea's brother, whose tribe helped them make it through the winter. What's even crazier about that is that she was abducted when she was 13 by the Hidatsa, 4 years before this. So she was abducted, trafficked hundreds of miles away from home, a home that wasn't set. The Shoshone were nomadic, sold into slavery, happened to be hired by Lewis and Clark, then happened to meet her brother in the middle of nowhere. George Stephen Morrison, the U.S. Navy captain who commanded local American forces during the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which led to the escalation of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, was the father of Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Tasmanian devil populations are heavily impacted by a contagious cancer that causes facial tumors. When devils bite each other on the face, the cancer cells spread from one individual to the next, and due to low genetic variation it is able to evade the new host's immune system and multiply. These cancer cells originally started out as normal Tasmanian devil cells but are now a separate parasitic organism, but by phylogenetic classification they are considered a descendant of Tasmanian devils and so would also be considered a marsupial. Similar contagious cancers have been found in dogs, Syrian hamsters and clams. Janet Jackson's 1989 song Rhythm Nation can crash some laptops with specific hard drives. The song's resonant frequency matches the natural resonant frequency of certain hard drives, causing them to shut down. Birds cannot taste spice. This is actually why peppers evolved. The spice would keep other animals away, so only birds would eat them and spread their seeds. Then humans came along and decided this hurts good and made them much more powerful than they would be in nature. The four people of Papua New Guinea practiced ritual funerary cannibalism. Unfortunately, a prion disease called kuru began to spread. It was transmitted when members of the tribe consumed infected human flesh. In the late stages of kuru, right before one dies, it causes paralyzation, which leads to a period of immobility prior to dying. This causes a thin layer of fat to develop around the entire body. Apparently the thin layer of fat made people ducking delicious, so infected bodies were actually prioritized for cannibalistic funerary practices. Venus flytraps can only be naturally found in one area of the globe. That area is in the coastal plains of the Carolinas. Penguins are extinct. Europeans were familiar with the great auk, which they called penguins, and hunted to extinction. When they started exploring the Antarctic regions, they discovered birds that looked similar and also called them penguins. But the birds we call penguins today are not actually related to penguins. For all of history, no human had ever flown until 1903. By 1969, humans were walking on the moon. It just sounds impossible to me that humans went from a plane that only flew for 12 seconds to successfully going on a trip to the moon and back in less than one lifetime. For reference, it took roughly 200 years to go from flintlocks to automatic weapons. And humans love killing each other more than anything else. George Washington was pretty much responsible for starting the 7 Years' War, possibly the first truly global military conflict. Guy started a world war and it's one of the least interesting things about his life. Jimmy Carter is the only former US president to have lived for over 40 years after leaving office. He's also the oldest ever former president. Donald Trump will be the oldest man to be inaugurated as president. He's also the first president since the 1890s to serve his terms non-consecutively. For a long time, trees and woody plants were non-biodegradable. This was because there were no organisms that could break down the lignin or the cellulose. It took 40 million years of evolution before a species of fungus emerged that was able to convert these components. By then, a thick layer of dead and fallen trees covered the earth. Wildfires were on a different scale back then. Plenty of log to put on the fire, so to say. It's also the reason we have natural deposits of coal. This is known as the Carboniferous period. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the building of the first Pizza Hut than to the building of the pyramids. The first Pizza Hut opened in Wichita, Kansas on the 15th of June, 1958. That means that the chain's opening is about 500 years closer to Cleopatra's lifetime than the construction of the Giza pyramids. New Mexico is older than Mexico. The territory of New Mexico was established by Spain in 1592, while the country of Mexico won independence from Spain and adopted that name in 1821. Both are named after a valley in present-day Mexico. found this out yesterday, but in 2011 a guy in Australia found what was essentially an infinite money hack on the ATMs where he could press transfer and transfer as much money as he wanted between his accounts. It would say the transaction was cancelled, but it wasn't cancelled, and he got to spend millions of dollars for 4.5 months until his conscience got the best of him. He tried to turn himself in multiple times and even went on TV to tell people about what he was doing, stealing millions from the banks. Despite trying to turn himself in, it took quite a while for anyone to investigate him, and when they finally did, he only got 1 year in jail and only forced to pay back a fraction of the money he stole. Pretty cool story. The head of security at the World Trade Center buildings at the time of 9/11 had previously worked for the FBI and had several times highlighted the risk posed by Osama bin Laden. One of the most absurd facts that sounds completely fake but is 100% true is that octopuses have 3 hearts and blue blood. Here's how it works. 2 of their hearts pump blood to the gills, while the third pumps it to the rest of the body. And get this, when they swim, the heart that pumps blood to the body actually stops beating, which is why octopuses prefer crawling to conserve energy. As if that's not wild enough, their blood is blue because it contains copper-based hemocyanin instead of the iron-based hemoglobin we have. Essentially, octopuses are nature's sea-free alien species living right here on Earth. Color doesn't exist. Color is created in the brain, and what we perceive is not the inherent color of an object but our brain's interpretation of the light waves bouncing off the object being observed. Another fun fact. The reason why pictures of anything under an electron microscope are always in black and white is because color doesn't exist at that scale. The things imaged by an electron microscope are smaller than the wavelength of visible light. The British fought and paid off the rest of the world for over 60+ years in order to end slavery. Even after paying, other nations and companies went back on the deals and continued to try and deal in slaves. This prompted the Brits to send the Royal Navy to Africa, and began raids on slave ships to rescue and free hundreds of thousands of slaves. Considering the pushback towards the British for this stance, had they not done so, it is very conceivable that the Atlantic slave trade would be alive and well today. The 10th President John Tyler has a living grandson. Harrison Ruffin Tyler is 96 years old today. His grandpa was born in 1790. 234 years ago. That is the most amazing fact to me. I posted the same thing. The Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest building in the world for around 3,800 years. It won't be until around 5,111 that it will have been not the tallest building for longer than it was the tallest. 90% of people in Northern Europe who have blue eyes are distantly related by their 500x great-grandma or great-grandpa, who had one of 3 specific mutations that result in blue eyes. They are also related to a 7,000-year-old dead guy they found in a cave in Spain, the oldest definitively known human to have had blue eyes.